This section discusses the energy and nutrient needs for physical activity for athletes and non-athletes, and it also does explain why athletes are at risk for dehydration and hyponatremia. What are the dietary needs for physical activity? So we need energy to fuel activity, and the amount of energy expended for any activity depends on the intensity, duration, and frequency of the activity and the weight of the exerciser. So we know that good nutrition is essential to performance, and that's whether you're a marathon runner or a mall walker. And we know that your diet must provide enough energy to fuel activity, enough protein to maintain muscle mass, and sufficient micronutrients to metabolize the energy-yielding nutrients, and enough water to transport nutrients and cool your body. The major difference between the nutritional needs of a serious athlete and those of a casual exerciser is the amount of energy and water required. So this graph illustrates the impact of running pace and body weight on energy expenditure per hour. So what you see here is the longer an individual continues to run, the greater amount of energy is expended. We know that body weight affects energy needs because moving a heavier body requires more energy than moving a lighter one. Therefore, if the pace is the same, a 170-pound woman requires more energy to run for an hour than does a 125-pound woman. So energy needs have a lot to do with gaining or losing weight. So body weight and composition can affect exercise performance. In sports like football or weightlifting, having a large amount of muscle is advantageous, and athletes may try to build muscle and increase their body weight. Healthy weight can be achieved through a combination of increasing your energy intake, having adequate, not too much protein intake, and muscle strengthening exercise to promote an increase in lean tissue rather than fat. But in sports like ballet, gymnastics, and certain running events, small, light bodies offer an advantage. So athletes may restrict energy intake in order to maintain a low body weight. While a slightly leaner physique may be beneficial in these sports, dieting to maintain an unrealistically low weight may threaten a person's health and performance. An athlete who needs to lose weight should do so in advance of the competitive season to prevent the calorie restriction from affecting their performance, and the general guidelines for healthy weight loss should be followed, and that's reducing energy intake by 200 to 500 calories a day, increasing your activity, and changing the behaviors that led to the weight gain. This is a diagram of the female athlete triad, and this is women with this female athlete triad typically have low body fat, and they don't menstruate regularly, so they have amenorrhea, and they may experience multiple or recurrent stress fractures. So neither adequate dietary calcium nor the increase in bone mass caused by the weight-bearing exercise can compensate for the bone loss caused by low estrogen levels. And the treatment for this involves increasing energy intake and reducing activity so that their menstrual cycle returns. So you may have heard wrestlers talk about making weight. So after 3 young wrestlers died while exercising in plastic suits in order to sweat out the water, wrestling guidelines were changed to improve safety. Weight classes were altered to eliminate the lightest class, And plastic sweatsuits were banned, and weigh-ins were moved to 1 hour before competition, and mandatory weight loss rules were instituted. And the percentage of body fat can be no less than 5% for college wrestlers and 7% for high school wrestlers. So how much do we need? What are the macronutrient needs for exercise? The source of energy in an athlete's diet can be just as important as the amount. So to maximize glycogen stores and optimize performance, a diet providing about 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day is recommended for athletes in training. The recommended amount of fat is the same as that for the general population, so that's between 20 and 35% of energy. And to allow for enough carbohydrate, fat, and fat intakes at the lower end of this range may be needed for some athletes. Diets that are very low in fat, so say less than 20% of calories, do not benefit performance. Protein is not a significant energy source, accounting for only about 5% of energy expended, but dietary protein is needed to maintain and repair lean tissues, including muscle. A diet which has about 15 to 20% of calories coming from protein will meet the needs of most athletes. We did discuss in Chapter 6, competitive athletes participating in endurance or strength sports may require extra protein. So in endurance events like marathons, protein is used for energy and to maintain blood glucose, and athletes participating in these events may benefit from 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight a day. And athletes participating in strength events require amino acids to synthesize new muscle proteins and may benefit from 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. And we know this amount is greater than the RDA, which is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, but it's not greater than the amount of protein habitually consumed by athletes. A lot of athletes will tell me they consume 2 to 3 to 4 grams per kilogram per day, and we now know that is not safe and that is not recommended. So the proportion of energy yielding nutrients in an athlete's diet, so that's carbohydrate, fats, and protein recommended in the diets, is shown in this pie chart, and they're within the ranges recommended for the general population. So 45 to 65% of total energy from carbohydrate, 20 to 35% of energy from fat, and 10 to 35% of energy from protein. And it's protein needs of athletes are usually recommended from either plant or animal sources, so from food. Dietary fat should be from sources high in the heart-healthy mono and polyunsaturated fats. And for carbohydrates, those should come from complex carbohydrate nutrient-dense choices such as whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy products. What about the vitamin and mineral needs for athletes? So and this is always a test question. So vitamin and mineral needs, the adequate intake is essential for optimal performance. And we need vitamins and minerals for energy production, oxygen delivery, protection against oxidative damage, and repair and maintenance of body structures. So we know that athletes has the same needs as the general population. Some vitamins or minerals may be increased because they have increased use or loss with exercise. In particularly, the DRIs acknowledge that the iron requirement may be 30 to 70% higher for athletes than for the general population. But typically, because athletes must eat more food to satisfy their higher energy needs, they consume extra vitamins and minerals with these foods, particularly if they choose nutrient-dense foods. But athletes who restrict their intake in order to maintain a low body weight may be at risk for vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So this is a picture of iron or sports anemia. So we know iron is a component of hemoglobin, and it's needed for the delivery of oxygen to cells, myoglobin. And exercise increases our need for the number of these proteins, and therefore increases our iron needs. So training causes our blood volume to expand in order to increase oxygen delivery, and increases the synthesis of red blood cells. That lags behind the increase in blood volume. And so what happens is a decrease in the percentage of blood volume that is red blood cells, because they're not formed properly. So the transport of oxygen is may be impaired, and as training progresses, the red blood cells have to catch up. So we do see an increased need for iron to keep up with this production of hemoglobin. Water needs, we know in exercise increases our water needs because it increases losses in sweat and respiratory system evaporation. We have a risk of dehydration. It's greater in hot climates like here in Florida than cold environments, but it can occur in the cold. And water is needed to cool the body and transport oxygen and nutrients to the muscles and remove waste products from them. So if a person loses 4% of their body weight as water during a competition, what percentage of their performance will be decreased by the end of this event? So I want you to look in your book on page 349 and really be able to interpret that data and answer that question. We know that dehydration occurs when the water loss is great enough for blood volume to decrease. So what happens, it reduces the ability of the circulatory system to deliver oxygen and nutrients to muscles. It reduces blood flow to the skin, and sweat production becomes limited, and the body can't cool itself, and so our core body temperature increases, and we end up with heat stroke or a heat-related illness. Heat-related illnesses are heat cramps. Those are muscle spasms during or after intense exercise. Heat exhaustion, that's the decreased blood volume, ability to cool the body, and oxygen delivery. So we see weak pulse, low blood pressure, disorientation, profuse sweating, and fainting, and even heat stroke, where we have confusion or unconsciousness. Here's a chart that talks about exercise in extreme conditions and where you need to be cautious. Hyponatremia is decreased blood sodium. Early symptoms are nausea, muscle cramps, disorientation, slurred speech, and it can cause water to move from the blood tissues and cause swelling. And sweating sometimes can result in this. So sometimes during endurance events, we not only need water and sodium, but unless you're in an endurance event, you probably don't need that extra sodium. So here's a normal blood sodium concentration. Extreme exercise can cause water and sodium loss in sweat, and replacing just water dilutes the sodium, you can see, and results in hyponatremia. So fluid recommendations for anyone for exercise: generous amounts of fluid in the 24 hours before an exercise session, about 2 cups of fluid for every 4 hours before exercise, 6 to 12 ounces of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes for the duration of the exercise, and after exercise for each pound of weight loss should be replaced with 16 to 24 ounces cups of fluid. Additionally, for exercise lasting an hour or less, water is the only fluid needed, and more than an hour, beverages containing carbohydrate or electrolytes may be recommended. Fruit juices and soft drinks are not recommended, and we know that competitive athletes need to plan talked about low carb, normal, high carb diets. Help us maximize glycogen stores, and you can review those. And we talked quite a bit about what to eat before exercise in a previous one, but please review